Hi, I'm Jean Meserve, and welcome to an Atlantic EventCast Small Business Recovery. Thanks a lot for joining us. Small businesses, the people who own them, the people who work at them, represent the American creative spirit. They're also a key part of the American economy. There is no need, I'm sure, for me to remind you that we are in month 8 of a global pandemic, and social distancing and lockdowns have meant that many small businesses have closed. Others are trying to adapt, but they may not succeed at doing that. So all of us, whether you live in a city, whether you live in a suburb, whether you live in a rural area, are impacted by this conversation. Those mom and pop restaurants and gyms and coffee shops are what make our communities unique, and they all right now are under financial strain. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the policy prescriptions being looked at by Washington, and we're going to try and put this recession in a broader economic and historical perspective. Before we begin, a thank you to AFLAC for underwriting today's journalism from The Atlantic, and also a reminder again to all of you that we would love to have you participate in this conversation. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function. Use that to give us your questions. Please keep them short, keep them on topic, and if you would, please let us know where you are joining us from. So let's get underway. Our first guest is a member of Congress. She is a Democrat. She is a freshman and she is from Kansas. Please welcome Congresswoman Sharice Davids. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here today. And I'm glad you're covering this topic. It's so important.
Well, let's talk about its importance and how it's impacting your district. What are you seeing in the small districts, the small businesses rather, in your district? How are they doing?
Well, this pandemic has certainly had devastating impacts, of course, on our public health, on folks, health and well-being. But when it comes to our small business community, and our area has a really vibrant, thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. Folks are, first of all, a lot of folks made use of the Paycheck Protection Program and EIDL, the emergency disaster loans. And right now, I think that folks are in that situation where they're trying to keep their employees paid, they're trying to keep the doors open, or they're trying to figure out if they're going to be able to open their doors back up. And, I think, of course, our communities are coming together to try to support small business and local businesses, but it's been a rough go of it, and a lot of folks are really struggling.
Have you seen a lot of closures of small businesses already?
I think like in a lot of areas, we're seeing particularly, our restaurants, our service type of businesses are really feeling the brunt of this. And yeah, I think that there's been quite a few businesses that have had to shutter their doors and are going to fight really hard to get back open when the time is right.
So let me ask you for an update on where exactly we are. We heard the president the other night say no more stimulus talks, and yet he's tweeted and talked about aid to the airlines and also stimulus checks. Have you heard from Speaker Pelosi? Can you tell us where we are in terms of talks?
Yeah, so first of all, I think at the end of the day, what the people want to see is another bipartisan relief package. We've been able to get a number of bipartisan relief packages done. So I feel, I know we can do it. And I think the speaker has been very clear that she's going to stay at the negotiating table. She's going to keep trying to fight to get relief to people. And I know I've been pushing for the leadership on both sides of the aisle in both chambers to really do that, to stay at the negotiating table and try to get relief to.
Hasn't the White House just walked away? Hasn't the White House?
Yeah, and I think the most important thing that our small businesses and businesses in general need is certainty, and to have indications from the president that they're not going to continue negotiations, and then in almost the next breath, here, where the negotiations at is the exact opposite of what our business community needs right now. We need certainty. We need to know that the leaders of both parties are going to be at the table trying to figure out ways to get real relief to people, because it's devastating out there.
Why are you optimistic that you can get anywhere, given the fact that they've been at the table for months and nothing's been produced?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I stay optimistic because I have a lot of hope for our country. I know that folks are working really, really hard. And I think that at the end of the day, the voices of so many, whether we're talking about our small business community, whether we're talking about the folks, the public health folks, or frontline and essential workers, people are really showing up and telling their elected officials that what we need is a relief package, and it needs to be bipartisan.
And any relief package will benefit Republicans and it will benefit Democrats. Virtually every economist is saying this is absolutely critical, and yet it's not getting done. Is this the perfect illustration of how dysfunctional the American government is right now?
I think I do think that this is an illustration of what partisan politics can look like, and how it can, frankly, it's a disservice to the American people. When you've got the Speaker of the House, when you've got the Chairman of the Fed, when you've got every economist out there saying we need to get relief to people now, I think that at the end of the day, you're right. It benefits everybody, but it hurts everybody if we don't do it. If we do it, it benefits everybody, and if we don't do it, nobody wins. Not the American people, and certainly not any of the elected officials who really are responsible for making sure that we get those relief packages.
Can you give us any inkling of whether there are negotiations still taking place right now? Although the president said we're walking away, are there still discussions going on, either between Republicans and Democrats on the Hill or between the Democrats and the administration?
I can only speak for what I've been doing, and then some of the email chains and conversations that I've had with my colleagues. Yes, I think that folks on the Hill are trying to come together and figure out ways to get something done. And for me, that means really calling on our leadership. And it really is. This is both parties. The pandemic is not a partisan issue. Our economy is not a partisan issue. Our small business and support of our small business is not a partisan issue. So we need to, literally, there are so many of us who are pushing for us to come together. And I think we've seen that over the last few weeks.
So what the president seems to be proposing in his tweets is some smaller sorts of incremental steps, like a $1,200 stimulus check for Americans. Would you support that?
Yes.
And he's also talking about aid to the airlines. Should they get aid before small businesses do, before state and local governments do? What's your view of that?
Well, my view of what we need to do, and it's interesting that we've got the president, again, the back and forth and inconsistency here I think has been staggering for a lot of folks. We have to have some pretty fundamental things. And I think these are the things that broadly have support. State and local funding is something that I know I've been pushing for. Making sure that we've got funds there for a national testing strategy, making sure that we've got support for unemployment relief, direct stimulus payments. I think what we've got right now is this is the framework, this is the foundation, and we've got a president who's in his way, which is tweeting about the policy proposals that he would be supportive of, and I think that opens the door to the deal that we can get done.
We have a couple of audience questions. Let's see if we can get them in. One from Brooklyn, with the closure of many large retail chains, is there any conversation going on to entice small business operators to step in and open new retail mom and pop stores in those spaces? Do you have any insight on that?
You know, for right now, I think most of the conversation has been around the maintenance of payroll. You know, we've got the payroll protection program, but that's not the end of the conversation for sure. You know, we've got a number of programs that, you know, I sit on the small business committee. So, you know, we have our 7A loan programs. We've got the small business and innovation and investment programs. I think that there are a lot of places that you're going to see us stepping up to make sure when we get on the other side of this thing, that we're really showing up for our small business community and that we're really helping to promote that entrepreneurial ecosystem. In fact, you know, there's a lot of work being done in promoting women in business and minority-owned businesses out of the Small Business Administration and the Small Business Committee as well. I think that those are the places where when we're on the other side of this thing, we can see a lot of growth.
We have another question from New York City. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs starting up during the pandemic, and for those who launched their businesses at the start of this year? Because there have been some that have started and some businesses that have actually thrived.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a really good point. And I before we got started, I had a chance to kind of look through. There's a lot of people on today, so I'm really glad that so many people are showing up. And I think, you know, there's a number of people who I think have testified in front of the Small Business Committee that you're either going to be talking to today or that are on the line. And, you know, we've heard in the Small Business Committee, I've heard from folks in the 3rd District in Kansas who started up a variety of businesses, some service-oriented, some that are literally in the space of providing services, virtual and remote services to people. And, you know, those kind of businesses have seen increases. And I think that we're probably on the cusp of a lot of innovation that is going to be spurred by the problem-solving skills that we're seeing coming out of adjustments to the pandemic. And I know we're going to continue to support the programs, the federal programs that exist right now, small business development centers, making sure we're supporting veteran business centers. These are the kinds of things that we have to keep doing, but make them more robust.
Let me ask a Kansas-specific question. So a lot of these new businesses require broadband access, and Kansas and I think it was Missouri received $50 million early on to get some increase in broadband. Is that sufficient? Is that enough? Has it made a difference?
So, you know, I think that the broadband issue, which I consider to be an infrastructure issue, and it's so important for our business community, education, telehealth, has been top of mind and something that we've really been pushing for. And I think that, you know, right now, we just passed the Moving Forward Act out of the House. I'm not sure that the Senate is gonna move on that, but you know, there's clear evidence that we have got to increase our broadband access. And I can't quite speak to the broadband access on the Missouri side, but definitely here in Kansas, we're seeing a lot of movement to try to increase for our rural communities and also those communities that are, you know, urban and more densely populated, that are still lagging behind and haven't seen the increased access to broadband that they really need.
We have one more question, this one coming in from LA. So far, those startups that were founded this year or last year have not been able to benefit from SBA or local governments since they asked for 2 years of tax returns. Now we're hurt and we've not been able to get registration fees, sponsorships. We've spent the money and we're not been able to get support from anyone, federal, state, or local. What can we do? Is there a lifeline for these people?
That's a really good question. You know, I think that since you're out in LA, it makes it a little bit harder from my position. But I know here in Kansas, there's been a number of funds that have been set up through some public-private partnerships that would that would be helpful and are helpful for those new and emerging businesses. But I think that first of all, reach out to our office and reach out to the Small Business Committee about ways that we can look at the flexibility that exists in some of these programs. Because right now what we're seeing, I mean, we had to pass, after we passed the Paycheck Protection Program, we followed on with the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act to make sure that we were really meeting the needs of the small business owners where they're at. And so please reach out to our office because I'd love to talk more about what increasing the flexibility in that looks like.
Before we let you go, any advice for consumers? What can they do to help small businesses? Shop, I suppose.
Yeah, some of the things that, of course, this is not a be-all, end-all answer, but we have definitely seen a pretty big push in our area for setting up, whether it's programs to help our small businesses through purchasing the gift certificates and that sort of thing. A lot of our small businesses have moved toward really innovating and doing a lot of curbside outdoor stuff. As the winter comes, I'm sure we'll probably see even more innovation around that. But yeah, I have a lot more barbecue sauce that's been delivered to me from our local KC barbecue places than I had before.
Okay, and we do have one more question, so I'm going to try and get this in too. Nonprofit health and other 501c3 organizations are small to mid-sized companies that employ Americans and serve millions of people as well. Can you offer any insight into next funds and support that might be specific to our sector? This is from Atlanta.
Yeah, so I think that when we talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and the way that has had to be more flexible than maybe it would have been before, making sure that our nonprofits have access to this kind of program is really important. But also, as we look at the forgiveness portion of this and what it looks like moving forward, that's an area where I think we really, we stay in close contact with the SBA. They have a lot of regulatory authority over it, but Congress really needs to hear from folks. So first of all, please reach out to your elected and reach out to our Small Business Committee and let them know how important the parameters and what you need to see in the Paycheck Protection Program and emergency disaster loan programs moving forward, because we're listening. And I think that that's going to be really, really important.
Congresswoman Sharice Davids, Democrat from the state of Kansas. Thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. I'm glad you're covering this.
And now let me introduce Kelly Schultz. She's Secretary of Maryland's Department of Congress. Secretary, are you there?
I am here.
Great.
Yes. How are you, Jean?
I'm well.
Thank
Nice
you.
to have you with us. Your governor, Larry Hogan, who is a Republican, I might add, says more stimulus is desperately needed. Has he communicated that to the White House, and what response has he gotten from them?
Well, I can't speak to his individual conversations that he's had with the White House, but I know that it's something that he has worked fervently on. Of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, he was at that point in time chairman of the National Governors Association, the Bipartisan Governors Association. And he had many conversations individually with the governors and the White House in order to be able to incorporate those types of necessary needs for the states moving forward.
So you know that the president has said no more stimulus talks till after the election. What's that going to mean for small business in Maryland?
Well, right now, Maryland picked up on the small business relief. We were one of the first states, if not the first state in the nation, that started our own small business relief plans. This was prior to us receiving any CARES Act funding specifically from the federal government. So when we started to go into the close down of the business phase in roughly around March 13th, like the rest of the country, it was on March 23rd that we opened up our small business grant and loan program to small businesses across the state. So within 10 days, we made that response because we knew that there was going to be that immediate impact. Now, during that period of time, we realized how the amount of volume that was coming from them. And so we could really understand that the length of time that this went on for was going to be instrumental in us to be able to continue to help with them. So any additional funds that we get from the federal government or which we can look at within other state programs, we will continue to help those small businesses. But we know that there are specific industries within that small business community, like the hospitality, the restaurants, some of the smaller retails, the hotels, and the small tourism and those accommodations that are going to need continued support for quite some time.
And if they don't get it, what's going to happen?
Well, we're already starting to see some of that, right? There's the unfortunate news that we hear too frequently. We would like for there to be no news of businesses saying that they're going to be closing their doors either temporarily or permanently. And to represent economic development in the state and with the Department of Commerce, who our main mission is to be able to grow and expand and attract businesses into our state and for there to be continued job growth. Of course, this is something that's a very different experience for us within the Department of Commerce. So our entire department has shifted over the course of the last 7 months to not only our main mission of attraction and growth and expansion, but just the sustainment of businesses in the state and coming up with ways. And sometimes, I'll be quite honest, sometimes it's not just a financial way that we can be supportive and helpful to these small businesses moving forward.
Oh, how else are you supportive if it isn't financial?
You know, the financial part is a big part. And so, but it's also a very confusing part. There's the programs that the Congresswoman was speaking of at the federal level through the SBA programs. Many, if not all states now have specific business relief programs at the state level. And then the local jurisdictions have business relief programs. We have seen programs come out of things like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other types of entities, some of the rural organizations and the USDA. So just being able to guide business owners through a wide web of resources is something that they have found very beneficial. Our regional representatives that are out on the streets every day, all across the state of Maryland, do that every single day. It's basically being their special entourage, right? Being able to kind of maneuver and guide them through a system that sometimes can seem like a big black hole. And we've gotten so much grateful thanks from the business community just for those types of responses.
You mentioned that the hospitality industry has been particularly affected, and that's a national phenomenon. Maryland is right now, as I understand it, it's stage 3 of reopening, which says that restaurants, for instance, can operate at 75% capacity. Are you rushing it?
I don't think so. They have 75% capacity for indoor dining. We do allow additional accommodations for outdoor dining purposes. I think the 75% capacity, I have heard that some restaurants are not going to the 75% capacity. There are some local jurisdictions that don't feel comfortable with where they are. So the governor has allowed those local jurisdictions to be more restrictive if they felt that their community had higher numbers than some areas of the state. Like many states, some of our more urban centered areas, our more populated areas have some of the higher numbers when it comes to the testing and the hospitalizations. So those jurisdictions may choose to not increase. And I think that they've done it really well. I think that the governor has managed it very well because he's taken a very slow approach. He's offered somewhat of a regional approach with individual communities being able to determine what their outcome looks like. And the benefit of that is that we have not had to shut anything down. We have not seen a rise in our numbers from the very slow approach that we've taken.
So I understand the economic imperative to increase capacity, but it's tough, isn't it, to figure out exactly what that tipping point is between being safe and being economically viable. Can you give us any guidance as to how you find the right point?
You know, I think as far as what I like to tell people, my crystal ball has been broken for about 7 or 8 months now. And being able to understand what exactly it is that's going to work it's going to be difficult for all of us. But I think looking at best practices and looking at what other states have done that may not have worked so well, a very fast opening for the state of Maryland was certainly not something that we were going to do because we knew that we wanted to be able to open slowly and give, according to the governor's roadmap to recovery, those 14 days or more to be able to see if those slow moving recovery openings were going to cause a rise in any of the healthcare numbers. When they didn't cause a rise in the healthcare numbers, we knew that we could safely go on to possibly a next step within one of those phases.
Let me ask you about delivery of services. In the early days of the pandemic, I recall reading that your department got some criticism for being too slow to get the money out there. Have you adjusted? Have you made changes? Is it easier? Have you streamlined the process? Is the money moving faster when there's money available?
Absolutely. So thank you for asking that question, because just like everybody else, you know, when we opened up the program on March 23rd, we had no idea that within a couple of days we were going to get tens of thousands of applications that were going to come through the department, which has absolutely no system able to work through that type of data. So I like to say that we were building the airplane in flight. And so as we were continuing to improve our processes, bringing additional types of information technology and infrastructure, data management systems, we brought in 150 other state employees from other state agencies to help to manage with that process. We brought in a wonderful, I'm going to say it's a business name, but the DocuSign process, so that we could take out the manual portion of delivery and receiving of grant documents. And that process right now, we were already able to go into a second round of funding that was made available to us. So that second round of funding was astronomically faster than the first round of funding, because I do believe that we continue to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of the systems that we were able to build.
A lot of state and local governments are under financial stress because of a decline in tax receipts. How big is the stress in Maryland? And is there the potential that your department, which is supposed to grow business, may be hobbled because you're not going to be able to pay your personnel?
Well, there's multiple questions in there, but I will say, just like every state, I think that Maryland will receive a hit in some way, shape, or form to the revenues. I think Maryland is recovering quicker than other states are. For example, in the month of August, and we don't have September numbers yet, but in the month of August, our unemployment rates dropped from 7.8% to 6.9%. We are seeing a return of some revenues, particularly in the tourism areas where we had some difficulties during the close down. Unlike some states, we left construction open. We were on a construction site yesterday and had a big groundbreaking. So we're starting to see those continued revenues, but there is going to be a shortage of state revenues for the next fiscal year 21, which all of the state agencies in Maryland are putting together right now. We are looking at what it means to possibly have some types of reductions, but that all depends on what the newest revenue projections look like as we get closer to the budget season.
And we're going to have to leave it there. Kelly Schultz, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And we're now going to turn to a session from our underwriter, Aflac. Please welcome Brad Knox of Aflac. He's joined by Paula Kalamafta of the Small Business Council of America. Over to you.
Thanks, Jean. Paula, do you want to get started?
Sure. Good to see you, Brad. I'm Paula Kalamafta, Chair of the Small Business Council of America. This is a membership nonprofit organization that exclusively focuses on tax, healthcare, other employee benefit issues that impact small businesses across the country. I'm happy to be here today with all of you, particularly you, Brad, for this important discussion on how we can best help small businesses survive the pandemic and create an environment for them to not only survive, but to thrive in the future.
And I'm Brad Knox, Senior Vice President and Counsel of Federal Relations for AFLAC. While most people recognize AFLAC as a Fortune 500 company, they don't often know about our connection and commitment to the small business community. With more than 400,000 small business customers across the country, AFLAC has a deep understanding of the needs of small businesses, as well as the impact that COVID-19 is having on this vital segment of the American economy. I'd like to thank you, Paula, for your leadership on the issues that are critical to the success and security of small businesses. And I want to say here that I'm a proud board member of the SBCA and have enjoyed working with you for so many years.
And we've enjoyed having you since you have such great insights, Brad. And the SBCA greatly appreciates the support that AFLAC has given us over the many years. It shows your commitment to small businesses across the country. Both of us, and I think everyone on this panel, know that small business has long been the engine of the US economy, and that millions of American workers, their families depend on small businesses for their livelihoods. We also know, unfortunately, even in the best of times, these companies struggle to meet the demands of growing a successful business, being able to hire and retain the best employees possible, and unfortunately, to be able to provide them with health insurance, other health benefits, retirement benefits, and other employee benefits. I think, and I think probably everyone around me thinks, that small businesses have never been tested like they're being tested today.
Well, Paula, for sure, I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I think you'd be interested to hear the results of AFLAC's 10th annual Workforces Report, which was conducted in June and July during the height of the COVID pandemic. It shed some insights into the challenges that small businesses face today because of COVID-19, as well as the struggles they confront even during good times. I'd like to share a few of those findings. First, because small businesses are more likely to struggle with cost, many offer fewer benefits, and those that do offer benefits are more likely to only offer major medical insurance. Second, of the small businesses that not currently offering benefits, 65% have never offered health benefits because they simply can't sustain the cost of an employee benefits program. And third, before the pandemic, 1 in 4 small businesses had stopped offering retirement benefits and were much less likely to offer family and medical leave, which we know leaves employees feeling more financially insecure in both the short and the long term.
So clearly, small businesses face challenges even before the pandemic. What does your research show us about, or tell us what about the impact COVID-19 is having on small businesses today?
So COVID-19 is really having an acute impact on small businesses, which are out of necessity, really just focused on financial security, keeping the doors open, maintaining cash reserves, and trying to survive the pandemic, because they have less access to credit and rely more on just foot traffic. When we look at larger companies, they're more focused on changing office structures to allow for remote work and looking at more macro issues. But for small businesses, COVID-19 is exacerbating the existing challenges, making it harder for their employees to mitigate risk and leaves them feeling more insecure financially. So small businesses that do not offer employee benefits had the highest percentage of respondents who said the pandemic has had an extremely or very negative effect on their financial condition, underscoring the precariousness of their situation. And small businesses are less likely to offer benefits related to COVID-19 or paid time off for employees diagnosed with COVID-19.
So we know small business had to face cost challenges before COVID-19. We know it makes it even more difficult now because of financial shifts caused by the pandemic. And we also know that many small businesses received some real help from the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, commonly known as the PPP. A recent survey by NFIB found that 20% of all small businesses said they would have to close up if conditions did not improve in the next 6 months. And we know that when small businesses are struggling financially, their employees are also struggling financially and become financially insecure.
Well, that's right, Paula. The research provides some insight into why employees feel that way, and the lack of benefits is adding to that. In fact, a majority of employees say that they would have difficulty going more than 3 months without a paycheck before taking on debt. And half of all employees say they are not financially prepared for an emergency, such as an out-of-pocket medical expense of $1,000. And 45% of employees said they could not adjust their finances to cover an unexpected out-of-pocket medical expense. 59% have missed a paycheck due to a major medical event, and 69% have taken time away from work due to a major health event. So not surprisingly, employees are looking to their employers of all sizes to provide benefits that can assist alleviate that financial insecurity. So I know we've only got another minute or two, Paula, so I'll switch it back to you.
Well, unfortunately, we know that small businesses are struggling to survive right now, really struggling. And this data from your workforces report really drives that home. And that the financial insecurity is having a ripple effect, not only through the small businesses, but their employees and then their families. Thank you for sharing the research, Brad. And that's all the time we have today to discuss this important topic, but I hope we can get back to it, and I hope we're part of the solution. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Paula. Small businesses are absolutely vital to our economy and have been responsible for the majority of new jobs in the U.S. As such, they're simply too important to our economy to ignore the crisis that they confront today. We all need to work together to help small businesses recover and have a better chance for success in the future. I'd like to thank the Atlantic for the opportunity to have this time. Thanks, Paula.
Thanks, Brad.
And thank you to Brad and Paula for those contributions, and thanks to AFLAC for its support of the Atlantic's journalism today. Let me now introduce two guests. Heidi Schultz is Senior Economist and Director of Policy at the Economic Policy Institute. Also joining us, Sean Kennedy, who is Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at the National Restaurant Association. Great to have you both with us here today. Heidi, give us some context here. Give us the big picture. Have small businesses ever faced the kinds of challenges that they're facing right now?
No, I think the answer to that is a definitive no. The kinds of things that are happening right now is unlike anything we've seen. You know, we lost, I mean, not just small businesses, but the economy overall, we lost 22,000 jobs in March and April. There has been a lot of rehiring, which has been great, but we've only added back about half of the jobs that were lost. So we still have this giant hole in the labor market. The obstacles that small businesses in particular are facing to reopen, to stay open, have just been enormous.
Sean, let me ask you about the impact on restaurants. How many have closed already, and how many are still in jeopardy?
It's a great question. Thanks for having me today. We are estimating that roughly 100,000 restaurants are on track to close by the end of this year. We're still working on how many of those are going to be permanently, but it's going to be definitely a struggle. In our last survey, 40% of restaurant operators say that unless there is significant financial support from the federal government, unless there's some kind of plan, any kind of plan, they are unlikely to last another 6 months. So we've really obviously we've never seen anything like this. This is basically a hurricane that hasn't stopped. That's the biggest challenge for restaurants, is they don't know when they will get back to the other side of this pandemic. Average restaurant has about 16 days of cash on hand. We're in month 7 of this pandemic for an industry that has a really tight profit margin. So the outlook is not great so far.
And the outlook isn't great for a stimulus package either. Looking at the current verbiage from the White House, it looks like we're not going to see one at least till after the election. Heidi, let me ask you, is this going to be absolutely crushing for the small businesses that are still open?
Yeah, I don't want to be such a doom bringer, but yes, I think that the lack of stimulus is incredibly problematic. I think that it will, nationwide, it will definitely extremely depress the rate of growth that we're seeing, if not push us into another recession. It's the Congress really has in their fingers millions of jobs. The difference between them doing the kind of stimulus that could get the economy back on track, which would include a huge amount of relief to businesses. Sean, I know that you know this, but in the bill that the House Dems passed, there was a ton of relief for restaurants in particular, 120 billion for restaurants, additional money for food services in airports that include a lot of restaurants, food trucks, that kind of stuff. So it would have been huge economy-wide and for small businesses. Pulling that money out it really spells disaster for the economy. It's one of the most tragic things about it is it's an unforced error. The virus happened to us. We didn't have to respond by turning to austerity so quickly, but that is unfortunately what it looks like we are doing.
Sean, put it in the context of the restaurant industry and how it's reacting to this news.
We were really surprised by this. Honestly, we weren't sure that a comprehensive bill could be done, but we at least thought that the parties would say, we're going to try to make this work. We never thought any one side would want to be tagged with, I'm walking away from talks. You did see the president begin to walk that back a little bit in subsequent tweets, asking for a smaller package, maybe another round of PPP, direct stimulus checks, support for the airlines. It is, you could find, if you're an optimist, which we have to be at this point, you can find some hope in the fact that Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi did have talks again today. So it's unclear exactly how this is going. The biggest challenge, of course, is there is just still a huge chasm between the House Democratic position, the White House position, and what Senate Republicans are looking for, not only on top line spending, but on policy items. What we've been calling for since September is to say, if you can't do a comprehensive bill, focus on the things that we know there's bipartisan agreement on. A second round of PPP, expanding the employee retention tax credit, things like that have passed both chambers now. If you have to do a long pass, does not seem likely to be executed. So let's just get 5 further yards down the field and keep restaurants open, at least for the winter season.
So in the first stimulus bill, we saw law firms, lobbying firms, private schools getting some of the money that I think many people expected to go to small business. Does the next bill, whenever we may see one, does it have to be structured differently in order to make sure this money gets to where it's supposed to go? Sean, let you take a crack at that first.
What we certainly, the interesting thing about PPP is by the end of the program, it ended with $130 billion still in the bank. Or still in the account, so to speak. A lot of smaller restaurants, particularly in minority communities, they didn't have enough of a pre-existing relationship with a financial lender to get in the door. So one thing that we've been calling for is for any grant program, you need to set aside either the first 2 weeks or a certain dollar amount needs to go to the smallest of operators so that they can finally get into the system. But there's also been a bit of shaming that's come out of this, of PPP, which is a bit unfair for some. There are mid-sized restaurant groups that were criticized for taking PPP loans, saying you are too big to need help. They gave the money back, but then they subsequently shut down that restaurant. So at this point, it doesn't matter what logo is on your uniform. Unless you're a quick service model that has that's more able to weather this storm, your job is in jeopardy, and we should be looking for assistance in any way possible.
Heidi, what changes would you like to see in subsequent legislation, presuming there is some?
The biggest thing we need is to get that legislation out. So the most important thing is to get the money out the door. But I agree with Sean that I wasn't worried when I saw things like Shake Shack getting PPP loans. The workers at Shake Shack, the business of that business also needed relief when we're facing something as enormous as the obstacles, as the crisis of the coronavirus crisis. But it is important that we also make sure that the small businesses have the access. We know there was a lot of prioritizing of people who had connections, were much more able to get those loans. And so it's just going to be really, really important that it's structured in a way that it gets out more broadly. So I'm not so worried about connected people getting loans. I'm deeply worried about non-connected businesses not getting loans, and that's where we really have to focus.
Heidi, there's some businesses that are thriving in this time, tech, for instance, new small businesses that have been created to answer some of the needs created by the pandemic. Is there a bright lining somewhere in this for some small businesses?
That is a fine question. So I'm racking my brain right now, and I'm seeing the bright line is that I'm thinking it through right now is mostly happening for big businesses. It's happening for big online retailers. I think many of the tech companies that are really hot right now because of all of the virtual work that's going on, they're bigger companies. I do think that I'm sure I'm missing something. So I'm sure there's some small businesses that are flourishing right now, but I do feel like on balance, this is just a huge challenge for small businesses and the workers that they employ.
Sean, we've seen some businesses adapt. A lot of them have gone to takeout, curbside delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a long-term strategy for survival?
It's really tough, Jean, because if your fixed costs don't change, let's say you're in a beautiful space in Old Town Alexandria, looking at the water. That doesn't. If you've got 60 tables and you're only allowed to fill 10 of them, your rent hasn't gone down. It doesn't matter how much takeout and delivery you're going to do. Just owning that space is just going to make it really tough. And then obviously, outdoor dining has been critical. It's October here in Washington. It's getting a little chilly. That's not going to be viable much longer. That's been a lifeline for a lot of restaurants, expanded outdoor capacity, but it's really not a long-term strategy. Probably, again, the biggest thing that what restaurants need is just some federal support so we can try to weather this storm. We're going to have to make changes. Once we get on the other side of this pandemic, our business model is going to have to change. But right now, unless you're going to see mass layoffs, mass reductions, mass closures of restaurants, we're going into the most dangerous period right now of the year for a restaurant.
Let me follow up, Sean, with a question from Brooklyn. Is there any program available to small businesses to help them gain an online presence, which would help them increase sales? In the restaurant industry, is there anything like that?
I'm not aware of anything. Certainly marketing is a critical part of it. We have, there are state restaurant associations. I think you said this was in New York. The New York State Restaurant Association certainly can work with that person to find out about if it was a restaurant asking. But there is no federal programs that I'm aware of that help small businesses on the marketing side. For us, that's a great suggestion. For a lot of us, it's just they're looking for operational costs just so they can keep their doors open a little longer.
Heidi, I want to ask you a couple of questions about long-term structural change. One of them is this: work from home. If it continues, are we going to see permanent shifts in where we see small businesses? Where will there, for instance, be fewer mom and pop grocery stores and restaurants downtown?
I think the answer is yes. I think that's definitely going to be true, at least until we get a vaccine or an effective treatment. That without a vaccine or an effective treatment, even without mandated shutdowns, we are still going to have people too afraid, reasonably so, to really interact a lot with the public. And so I do think that once we get a vaccine or an effective treatment, I think things will sort of inch back to looking more like normal. But we know that it probably boosted some longer term trends towards the decline in those kinds of businesses. So I think we will see some lasting effects.
So, Sean, does that open up opportunities in other places, smaller cities, let's say, which may see an uptick in population because more people are operating remotely? Or at this point in time, is that just a step too far to think about that?
A lot of restaurants, honestly, they're making their business plans about 2 weeks in advance. So when Heidi was talking about the crisis, if Congress leaves without doing anything, restaurant owners are making business decisions for the end of October based on what Congress is deciding right now. We are really concerned that without something, at least a second round of PPP, if not something more comprehensive, it won't be an issue in January because too many restaurants are closing. Probably the biggest surprise that we've seen for average people is a revered restaurant that was always considered too popular or too fantastic is shutting its doors after 40, 50, 60 years. That's how high the floodwaters have gotten here. And that's how real the stakes are if Congress does not walk away, or if Congress does walk away from the situation.
Heidi, give us a longer term view. What's the small business economy going to look like in a year, in 5 years?
That is a really good question. So I have never been more wrong in my economic projections than I have been over the last 7 months. And I don't think I'm alone in that. But we do have some information. I think that jobs are coming back. We're seeing them. There's been a rebound. They are not going to come back. The restaurant jobs, other kinds of small businesses are not going to come back to pre-recession levels until we get a vaccine or an effective treatment. So the answer to that question really depends on that. What does the public health landscape look like? And then it really depends on whether Congress acts. If Congress acts and gets the kind of relief that we need, we could get ourselves on a pathway towards a more speedy recovery. If Congress does not act, we are facing years and years of really depressed economy, and small businesses will be hit particularly hard. So it's hard to answer, not just because we're all having trouble with forecasting things, but because it's so dependent on how the public health scene unfolds, and probably even more dependent on whether Congress takes action to support the economy.
Sean, you have worked on Capitol Hill in the past. Can you explain this? And is there any reason for any optimism that Congress will take action?
There's always cause for optimism. I mean, Congress actually
perversely put it that way.
No, but Congress actually does well when when the gun is against their head. Actually, that is usually when they are able to finally realize this. The press interest and the outrage from small businesses, Americans, at the events of the past 24 hours, 48 hours, with walking away from the talks, has really been it's beginning to catalyze a reaction in Washington. But the challenge still is, if Democrats are saying 2.2 trillion, Senate Republicans are saying 400 billion, that's a big difference. There are policy items that are still dividing them as well. And then last is, if I was a Democrat on the Hill, I'd probably be looking at the odds and saying, do I want to negotiate right now? And can I write an even better bill if I pick up seats in the House, if I pick up seats in the Senate, and perhaps take the White House as well? So it's those elements are really sort of what the biggest challenge of it is. But again, it's going to take an enormous catalyzing event outside, a stock market crash, god-awful unemployment numbers suddenly appearing, before Congress is going to finally come together and find some way to move forward.
And we have to leave it there. Heidi and Sean, thank you both for your insights today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jean.
Thanks so much.
And for our final conversation, let me introduce Darin Williams. He is CEO of Southern Bancorp. Darin, great to have you with us. First of all, you are a community development financial institution. Some of us may not be familiar with that term. Explain what that is and what it does. Give us the thumbnail.
Sure, Janine. First of all, thank you for having me. And I appreciate that question. So a community development financial institution, or most commonly referred to as a CDFI, we focus on serving low wealth and underserved communities. So that's a designation by the Department of Treasury. And 60% of our activity must take place in economically depressed or distressed communities. And so we operate Southern Bancorp Inc. and Southern Bancorp Community Partners, which we're both a bank, a regulated for-profit bank. We also have a loan fund. So there are probably over 1,000 CDFIs across the country, both banks, credit unions, loan funds, and even venture funds. And as such, our focus really, again, is on serving the underserved communities that often have lost banks, that don't have banks, or people who don't have traditional access to capital.
And how critical was your role, has it been, during this pandemic?
Yes, so we have experienced a resurgence of interest in our work. We've been doing this work for years. And I think what you saw with the pandemic, you saw it was a bright light that was shown over the inequities in our systems. Those in the economic system who had access to banks and had relationships, they were served well. But for the CDFI industry, many of those smaller, very, very small businesses, those who didn't have traditional access to capital and credit, would have been left out. I'm proud to say that Southern, the day the Paycheck Protection Program opened, the very day it opened, we began to process and even fund loans when larger financial institutions were trying to decide if they're going to do it, if they're going to do it for just their customers or for new customers. We processed over about 1,300 paycheck protection loans for about $112 million. We provide other relief for our customers. And so the CDFI sector, we really did a good job in serving very, very small businesses, and those particularly women, Native businesses, and minority businesses that often don't have access to the larger financial institutions.
And yet, despite what you did, those are the businesses that have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic.
That's exactly right. And that's why it was important the work we did. In the first round of the Paycheck Protection Program, there was really no carve out, no focus on those very small businesses. In the second round, we were able to work with Congress and the administration to encourage them to really make a carve out for those very, very small businesses that may not have those ready access and relationships with banking. So Congress and the administration carved out about $30 billion to really reach that segment. And what we were telling the administration, what we were telling Congress, that if you're not intentional about the distribution channels that you use to reach everyone, you're going to leave a large swath of the community out. And so when we do start recovering, it's going to be harder for those communities and those businesses that don't have access to recover. So I'm proud that they did that, but we need more. Just like Sean and Heidi said in your previous segment, these small businesses, just like other businesses, they need more support, more relief, because they were already operating in underserved areas where had already seen significant job loss, like in the Arkansas and Mississippi Delta, where we operate. Pre-COVID, we were struggling. So we are in really desperate situations now and need more assistance.
We have a question here. Over 60% of minority small businesses in the state of New York and California did not receive PPP. What percentage of minority small businesses received it or haven't received PPP? Also, what amount of small businesses have closed as a result of this pandemic? Presumably, they mean minority small businesses.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, Janelle, I don't have those exact stats, but I can tell you, but for the CDFIs who worked hard to provide access to those minority businesses that did have access, did receive Paycheck Protection Program dollars, it would have been worse. It is really unconscionable that we would leave such a large group of businesses out of the process. And I'm happy that Congress and the administration chose to set aside dollars, but we need to find other channels and ways to reach the smallest of small business, the minority communities, because they are struggling. They were even pre-COVID in sometimes in desperate situations, and unfortunately we know some will not make it. Some will not be able to survive and make it on the other side.
I have asked everybody else who I've talked to this morning about the prospects for another stimulus bill, which look mighty poor right now. So your reaction, what specifically will the lack of another bill mean for these minority businesses that you serve?
Yeah, so for both our minority and majority business, small business, it would probably be devastating. We've worked very, very hard with our borrowers. We provided a significant amount of loan relief. At one time, we had about 15% of our $1 billion plus loan portfolio in some type of COVID forgiveness relief, either whether it's only interest-only payments or complete 90 days without payment. And that's starting to roll off, and people they're going to struggle if we cannot find ways to support them through additional stimulus dollars, additional Paycheck Protection Program dollars, and find a way to make those dollars reach all businesses. There's a large swath of particularly minority businesses that operate in kind of the kind of shadow economic system. They didn't get access to the Paycheck Protection dollars because they've not been in business for a year, or they may not have all the paperwork necessary to actually access those programs. But they are providing jobs in those markets that we serve. And as a result of that, one of the things that we did, we actually through our loan fund, we actually created a grant program on our own, partnered with other philanthropic organizations, and we started providing grant relief to those small businesses. We're talking about the folks who have mom and pop barbershops and the small restaurants and employ just a few people. They actually are part of the economy, and they help produce jobs in some of these small markets that we serve. And but for the support of philanthropic organizations, they were left out of this Paycheck Protection Program. And so we've got to find a way to reach deep into the community and bring everyone up and give everyone access to these dollars.
We have a question from Brooklyn. Does your bank provide microloans to small businesses? If not, will you look into it?
Absolutely, we provide microloans. So our smallest paycheck protection loan was $200. Our average paycheck protection loan was $80,000. Of those 1,300 we did, the average was $80,000. We did it in the smallest $200. Every year we'll do about 7,000 loans. Our 55% of our loans will be for less than $10,000. And last year we did 1,200 loans for less than $1,000. So we are absolutely working in the microloan space.
So you have talked to the White House, you've talked to the president. I'm sure you talked to members of Congress. Did they get it? Did they understand where small businesses are right now?
Well, unfortunately, it seems like because of politics, there's a disconnect between what they understand and what's happening, right? So I've got to believe they get it. I just hope they can put aside their partisan differences and really provide relief to the American people. We cannot continue to play politics with people's lives who actually need this support to keep the economy rolling. If we're going to find a vaccine, if we're going to recover from this, we want those businesses to be around to actually get to make it to the other side. So I really hope that the administration and Congress can work their differences out and really provide the relief that the American people need, that the American economy needs.
If there is another bill, whenever it is, what changes do you want to see in it?
Well, I think the relief needs to be targeted, right? So, and like your other guests, I didn't have a problem with some of the names that you saw receiving PPP dollars because they actually employ people. And it was not about the company, it was about the people who work in those jobs. They need to be able to buy groceries, pay rent to survive. So it's not that I had a problem with the program. I want to make sure that we use intentional channels to reach the small business operator that I'm talking about. We got to make sure that small businesses who don't have traditional access to banks, who use CDFIs and other micro lenders, how can we make sure they access those dollars? So we want to see that. But what we want to see right now, what the banking community wants to see right now, we want to see some clarity around loan forgiveness. We've submitted several applications to the SBA for loan forgiveness for round one. They've not acted on a single one. We need loan forgiveness, and there have been a number of members of Congress who have said, and the administration, we believe that any loan less than at least $150,000, some have said as much as $1 million, should receive blanket automatic forgiveness, just making sure that the small details are handled. We've got to have that to be able to give people clarity. We've got businesses now who it's time to start paying these loans back. The government made a promise that these were grants. If they follow the rules, they follow the rules. Now the government's not answering the question, are they going to be grants? Are they going to actually be forgiven? We need clarity around loan forgiveness right now, even before we get to round two.
Well, there's a long to-do list for Congress and the White House right now. Thank you, Darin Williams, CEO of Southern Bancorp, for joining us today with your insights. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today for this Atlantic Live Eventcast. Thanks to AFLEC also for their support. We hope to see you soon for another event. In the meantime, stay safe.